In 1471, in southern Wales, during the War of the Roses, Jasper Tudor escaped a siege of Pembroke Castle with his young ward, Prince Henry. They traveled to Tenby, and there they hid in tunnels beneath the mayor of Tenby's house and St. Mary's Church. Spent several days hiding there before a ship could be arranged. They took the same tunnels to the beach and escaped by ship to France. I'm Joshua Kitts, the director of the Composed Dream Game Marketplace, and I'm telling you this story because I recently visited Tenby, and also because this is the sort of story that Palanquin is emulating. This is part of our RPG unboxing series, so let's get into what is inside this RPG if you should pick it up. Well, Palanquin is by Genesis of Legend Publishing. It is what I would call a story game. The print version is $12 Canadian, and the PDF only version is $7. You always get a PDF included if you do get a print version from the Composed Dream Game Marketplace. So, Palanquin is a game of escape, a game that tells the story of a royal escaping from a tumultuous situation. In Palanquin, the GM takes on the role of the princess, and the GM acts a bit more like a facilitator in this than some more traditional games. The players take on the role of bearers, and each bearer has a 2-page spread in this 32-page book that gives them details on how to play their character and an archetypical sort of personality. So we have Perianni the Hunter, and their domain is nature, and are the master of it. And we have Melanie the Faithful, the bearer of religion, and we have Tanalor the Magister, the bearer of magic. There are 6 different bearers that you could choose from as a participant, and you would only ever play with 5, so each game does play differently for that reason. The setting of Palanquin is there has been a palace coup in a Bronze Age type of civilization that reminds you a little bit of Egypt, but maybe has more of a kind of Amazon type vibe at the same time. The warriors wear reed armor, and there is magic in the land. This is an adventure and game system all in one, and it's meant as a one-shot game that you'll play perhaps when you don't have all the players for one of your regular game, or you just want to try something different. As I said, this is in the story game space, so players do have a lot more control over what's happening. What the princess primarily does is facilitates the game, decides when new scene or facilitates new scenes starting, and passes judgment on the players at the end. The assumption of this game is that the princess successfully escapes to her Aunt Beru in a neighboring kingdom. Outlined in here are a number of different what it calls scenes, but I like to prefer to think of as more phases in the journey. So any of these phases could last a number of days or even weeks. They're just places or settings that that narrative takes place in. So what do players do during this? Well, it is actually the player's job to introduce threats and pose questions and face the threats. So if you were Tanalorn, I believe, the bearer of magic, your job would be to recognize magical and mystical threats and point them out and choose somebody to face that threat initially. If they fail to face that threat, which is resolved by a simple d6 roll, in which case the player narrates how well it goes, and if it fails, they narrate how poorly it goes. They get to either roll 1 die or 2 die, depending on whether they can make an argument for whether it fits into their area of expertise. And then the scene would move on if the princess successfully rolls something based off of the number of questions that the narrative has explored thus far. So the basic framing is the princess introduces the scene or the setting for a phase of play. The players ask some questions. If they get answered, that gives the princess some dice to potentially end said scene and move on to a new scene. And then a player would introduce a threat that will be confronted. If nobody can beat the threat, the princess tries to beat it last. And if she fails, then the bearer who introduced the threat automatically resolves it. But this comes with the consequence of the princess being terrified of how this player has overcome said threat. And then at the very end of the game, once you've headed through 6 scenes, I believe, the princess sort of relates how everything went and touches on and passes judgment on what she thinks of each of the bearers and how she wishes to reward them or punish them for what has transpired. I ran this game back in April, I believe, 2021 at Kingston Area Gamers Convention online and enjoyed it quite a bit. It does certainly help to have your players in the frame of mind that this is a story game, it's more narrative, so you're not adjudicating actions in the very, very kind of brief segments. You could narrate that you spend a day trying to evade a group of a warband pursuing you, and then you discover that your attempts at evasion have failed, and that could be the attempt to resolve the threat. So you can have a grander and broader scope. And there are suggestions for threats on everybody's sheet. There are suggestions of threats that you could introduce, and there are suggestions for questions that you might want to explore and bring up, and that helps a great deal with easily picking this up and giving it a run. All you really need is somebody who's picked this up, read through it maybe once, maybe reviewed it a second time a little bit before running it as the facilitator, as the princess, and then you can just hand out the sheets for each of the player, and they'll be able to you'll be able to have an enjoyable evening playing Palanquin. Well, I hope that's piqued your interest in Palanquin. I'm looking forward to running it again. If you head over to composedreamgames.com/marketplace, you'll be able to find where you can pick this up fairly easily, or you can just click a link down below. If you have played Palanquin before or run it before, I'd love to hear about your experience in the comments. As I am the director of the Composed Dream Game Marketplace, should you pick this up, I will receive 10% of the revenue. All the rest will go to the publisher. Thank you, and good gaming.